because you always get randos. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to my first interview of the day. Very excited to be talking with a very smart guy, college professor and author. He wrote this book, which is so good. And we talked like 3 years ago for the first time. And then I just ghosted him. And I was like, why did I do that? It's because he went to Harvard for a year in between, where he was some kind of fellow. Very impressive. He's at the University of Iowa. But I'm really happy to have back on with me the author of On Critical Race Theory, Why It Matters and Why You Should Care. There's so much to talk about. Professor Victor Ray, welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. Good to see you.
It's good to see you, and thanks for having me back.
Yeah, I guess it must have been quite the culture shock. I mean, you grew up in Pennsylvania, but you're a professor at Iowa. You're raising your son there, and then you did a year in Cambridge. You and your son, your family must have been kind of shocked by the differences in culture of that little part of Boston.
So the culture is different. I think one thing about living in Iowa is daily life is pretty easy in terms of getting around and transportation. I walk to work. So it was a little harder there to get around. There's no parking anywhere in Cambridge. Prices are sky high. But, you know, the culture of academia is pretty similar in different places, although I would say the intensity at Harvard is a bit ramped up. And I would say, you know, it was actually a very interesting year to be at Harvard, given what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And the sort of Trump administration's attacks on Harvard. And specifically, you know, I was a racial equity fellow, and the attacks on folks doing the kinds of research and work that I do.
Yeah, I should have asked that right away. I didn't even think of that, but Harvard under assault by the federal government, specifically the White House, the administration, and you being there doing the work that you're doing. How have you seen the paradigm shift just on that alone before we get to the executive orders, the laws, the court decisions?
So I think, you know, I assumed I'm at the University of Iowa, and we were one of the first states to pass a sort of anti-CRT law targeting elementary schools way back in 2020. And there has been some pressure on the university around sort of teaching diversity and, you know, teaching about race and ethnicity. But I haven't felt it all that acutely, right? My classes are protected in terms of, you know, there's states like Florida in which there's sort of direct intervention in what people are teaching, and I haven't experienced any of that. But I will say, while I was at Harvard, I thought, oh, I'm under a lot of pressure here at Iowa from the sort of national politics. And it's going to be nice to be at Harvard because, you know, they're the richest university in the country, if not the world. And I assumed that wealth and power would insulate them from the attacks. But as a number of folks at Harvard made clear to me, it actually made them the biggest target in the country. Right. And so folks were, I guess the way to say it is being careful. Right. So scholars who do the kind of work that I'm doing are making sure that what they say is exact, that what they're claiming in the classroom is based on empirical evidence, not based on opinion about what the administration may or may not be doing. And, you know, I'm sure people are less likely to admit this, but folks, I'm sure some folks have altered what they're teaching or how they present material for fear of retaliation from
there's no doubt about it.
Administration, right?
There's I mean, I think my friend Professor Siegel wholly admitted it. He's con law professor at at Georgia State in Atlanta. He's terrified, especially, you know, when they came for Jimmy Kimmel a few weeks ago, and we've seen so many academics under fire after the Charlie Kirk assassination. So that scared people even more than the initiatives and efforts that you already talked about in terms of the targeting of these universities. So yeah, it's no surprise that people are being careful about what they're saying and what they're doing. You want to add anything to that?
Well, I think there's some irony here in that the right for years has had this whole sort of set of complaints about so-called censoriousness from the left and cancel culture and freedom of speech. And then the moment they get power, they actually implement a series of laws and public attacks that are worse than anything that the left has done in the past 10 years, in which that sort of concerns about cancel culture became to the fore on the right. And so I'll say that. And I'll also say that I think it's important for folks to not, within their power, I don't want people to lose their jobs. I want people to be able to keep teaching. But I think it's really important for folks, given these decisions, to sort of hold the line on what they're teaching, right? Stick to the material, stick to the evidence. But, I teach about immigration, and I taught, there were some ICE raids in downtown Iowa City a few weeks ago. I taught about immigration about a week after. I talked about sort of, the Trump administration funding ICE to a degree that puts it within the top 10 militaries in the world. I mean, top 20, excuse me. Let me be clear. Puts it between Canada and Turkey in terms of funding for policing immigrants in the United States, right? And my students came and thanked me afterwards, because they were like, there's raids in downtown Iowa City. This is affecting our life, and we don't have a place to talk about this, right? And it is important, no matter what side they're on in these sort of debates, to have the basic information about what's happening, right? And so, yeah.
I mean, it brings me to another question I wasn't really necessarily planning on, but whenever you're talking to, an academic, someone like yourself with experience at several universities, published author and all the rest, it's like, it does beg the question as to I think the mission statement is to rewrite how higher education works, how it teaches, and police it and influence it top down from the federal government. And basically, I mean, try to make it less liberal, because once you go to college, you tend to become more progressive, more liberal, more, I would argue, open-minded. But there is this huge movement to kind of, I would argue it's very Christian nationalist, to, if I were to shorten it, but a conservative right-wing movement against universities, higher education, to make them, quote, less liberal, less woke. What do you want to say about that, even before we get to some of these other issues that affect the rest of us in terms of the mission against DEI and all the rest?
So I think what you're saying about this mission is very clear. I think that I'll say two things about it. One is that this is like standard process from the authoritarian playbook.
Yeah.
So Viktor Orban in Hungary immediately took over the universities. Authoritarians do this because universities, in the same way that they attack the press, are an independent check on the propaganda that they put out, right? And so I think that's the first thing, that this is a clear pattern that authoritarians do. The second thing is that the top-down nature of what they're doing is also like really apparent. And I think the clearest way in that is the compact that the Trump administration, that was funded by a billionaire, put out, and they tried to coerce colleges and universities. It was 9 colleges and universities,
right,
into signing. And I read that entire compact, and first of all, it is like absolutely incoherent, right? It starts by saying something along the line, I'm paraphrasing here, but it starts by saying something along the lines of, America has the greatest system of higher education in the world. And I'm like, that's absolutely true. And then everything that they're proposing to do to the system of higher education after that would destroy American preeminence in higher education, right? So it would put a check on the kinds of things that people can study. One of the reasons America is so successful in higher ed is professors have freedom to pursue knowledge where it takes us, right? Limiting that for authoritarian goals is going to make us less competitive.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, but you know, for them, it does remove a check. The other thing, I'll say one last thing about the compact.
Just to mention, it's a really important point. 7 of the 9 universities the White House initially approached about plan to steer more federal money towards schools aligned with Trump's priorities. Trump's priorities, is New York Times writing, have refused to endorse the proposal. On Monday, an 8th signaled that it had reservations about it. Only one, University of Texas, suggested it might be open to sign it on quickly. And later, they say the compact includes conditions like agreeing that academic freedom is not absolute, and pledging to potentially shut down institutional units that purposely punish, belittle, and even spark violence against conservative ideas. I mean, this is wild to read about it, but I just wanted to give a little bit more color and support to what you're saying, just in terms of the latest developments on that story.
Right.
Colleges are standing up against it, not signing it, which is great. They're not bending the knee, right? This is good.
I do think that that's great. And I hope that, you know, those are some of the top places in the country. I hope that folks follow suit. What worries me is where colleges are agreeing with the Trump administration, and we can get into some of this with around sort of the destruction of diversity, equity, and inclusion on campuses.
Yeah.
Because in some areas like academic freedom, they are pushing back strongly, and that's great. But in other areas, they're saying, you know, they're tending towards resegregation in ways that I think are very dangerous and going to also have long-lasting impacts on higher ed. I do think you did quote a line in there that's really important, though. The line about belittling conservative ideas, because what does that mean?
I don't know.
Does that mean if I'm a climate scientist and I teach that global warming is real, I'm belittling conservative ideas?
Right.
If I teach what I teach, which is racism is bad, am I belittling conservative ideas when you have, you know, the young Republicans and racist group chats this week? So I think that is a line that is, very dangerous.
It's real vague, and that's done on purpose. It's in Project 2025, this attack on higher ed. There are point people in it. The New York Times Daily just had a pretty interesting episode about it yesterday. And then today I also listened to the same podcast, and they had Nikole Hannah-Jones on. One of the things I want to talk with you about is some of the things that they were talking about as well, because basically what she was saying is, you know, she of course, the author of the 1619 what's it called?
Project, the 1619 project.
Yeah. And she talked about what's called the nadir, which is refers to the lowest point in race relations in U.S. history, roughly from the end of Reconstruction to World War II. And then, of course, came Jim Crow, and then, of course, came the Civil Rights Movement, which led to the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. But then maybe we can, I don't know if we want to fast forward, but I will, to basically John Roberts getting put on the court and the beginning of the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, Section 5. And now last week, Section 2 looks like it's going to go. She's basically saying, I'm worried about there being another nadir, another low point in race relations as a result of undoing the Voting Rights Act. And one could argue undoing the Civil Rights Act as well, which creates protections for people of all types, has been added to, has been made more robust, has been confirmed by the U.S. Senate 99-0 up until 2006, by the way, the Voting Rights Act. So you can pick up there, because you wrote, you know, a really interesting piece at this very interesting outlet, theemancipator.org, which is eliminating DEI isn't just racist, it's segregationist. And of course, we have to talk about DEI, but we also have to talk about something quite different, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act before it, I feel like. What do you think?
Right. So you just condensed like a lot of history there. And so I want to say, you know, the thing I wrote in The Emancipator, I think, is actually a continuation of some of the things that I was saying in my book about why the attacks on CRT, which sort of morphed into the attacks on DEI,
Right.
were happening, right? And
yes, I saw it at my school board meetings. It was CRT right into DEI, just as
right into DEI.
They don't people that we're talking about didn't even know what those acronyms mean. But go ahead, sorry.
It was the same people. It was the same.
Oh, I know.
It's the same propagandists who went from CRT to DEI.
I know they're my neighbors. I know them.
So one of the things that happened here was a conflation in I read the article that the Hannah Jones podcast is based on. And so one of the things that happened with CRT and DEI was a conflation of, Christopher Rufo, who was sort of the leading propagandist, said he did this on purpose. I'm getting a bunch of ideas that most Americans hate. I'm putting them together and I'm calling them DEI or CRT. And then I'm using that to put forward a sort of conservative movement. And one of the things that I think is really interesting in the Hannah Jones article is she points out that they're saying DEI, but what they're gutting is civil rights laws.
Right.
So they're getting rid of the protections that are in. Sorry, my dog.
No worries. Yeah, it's such an important distinction that you're talking.
Sorry. I'll pick up there if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Getting rid of the protections, there's a couple of ways that the Trump administration has done this. One is they got rid of an executive order signed by LBJ in 1965 that covered affirmative action in federal contracting, right? This is a huge percentage of the federal government. And and Trump got rid of that executive order.
And the reason why a lot of people, my understanding, work for the federal government because of such protections.
So this is actually a good point that maybe we should start with, is that after the Civil Rights Act passed and, there were federal protections, anti-discrimination protections, the public sector ended up hiring many more Black folks in the private sector because the actual anti-discrimination propositions were enforced there. It was easier to enforce them in the public sector than the private sector. So the growth of the Black middle class was quite literally based on public sector and often federal government employment. So gutting this, there was a report a few weeks ago about since Trump has taken office, 300,000 Black women have been forced out of the workforce. That is a result of some of these moves, of gutting DEI, of getting rid of civil rights protections in the federal bureaucracy, right? And there was another report about the Black unemployment rate jumping. I believe it was like to 6.7 or 6.8%, right? A percentage that if it was all of America, we would consider a recession.
Yes.
So the conditions for Black Americans in response to this are major. So on the one hand, Trump is getting rid of the laws where he can. The other thing that he's doing is firing enforcement officers. So I think a sort of full-throated attack on the Civil Rights Act that lots of Americans would say, this is bad and we're opposed to this, right? Civil rights still polls pretty well. But you don't need to get rid of the law. And this is the kind of thing that happened under Jim Crow a lot, was that there were legal protections on the books, but local folks figured out ways to undermine those protections, right? And so if you get rid of enforcement officers at the Department of Education, the Department of at HUD, then anyone who brings a complaint can't actually have that complaint adjudicated. Right. So discrimination has no remedy, and they avoid the sort of front stage fight that they would have if they came out and said, we're overturning the Civil Rights Act. So it can be a sort of dead letter law. And, lots of scholars, I think Hannah Jones talks about this, but lots of scholars have talked about this is often the way that denying people voting rights during Jim Crow worked, right? Is you had a race neutral law like a poll tax, and folks understood that, when whites went to vote, they weren't going to be forced to pay the poll tax. But it was only going to be enforced on Black folks. Or they had literacy tests in which, the literacy test was given, but it was interpreted differently based on the race of the person taking the test.
Right.
So you had neutral sounding laws that ended up disadvantaging people of color. And this is Trump is innovating, right? The Trump administration is innovating, but we have seen this kind of process lots of times in U.S. history when it comes to disenfranchising people.
It's such an important history. It's very important to pay attention to what's going on, because we get settled into thinking, in this case, there are protections for people. Right. And so to not understand the history, why these protections were needed, and then to not understand kind of the present, to know that these protections are being removed, is why we're talking to you, why I'm talking to you. It's such an important issue for people to understand and to do something about, and to care about and to think about. I think I always get stuck with the fact that these protections were needed because of what was happening in America. And so people kind of understood it to a certain extent, but they understood what we were talking about with racism. What I didn't know was, even back then in the 60s, when white people were polled, they thought even back then that they were more likely to suffer discrimination than people of color. I couldn't believe it when I heard that. And I can't believe it when I heard it now. And there was a poll a few years back, and there's this polling every so often, every year. White folks feel like they're more discriminated against than black folks. But that used to be more subtle. Now they're screaming it from the rooftops. Charlie Kirk was the minister of that idea. More and more white people, including young white folks, believe that. What do we do about that? What do you want to say about me muddling through trying to...
What do we do about that?
Well, it's more about, I guess my question is, can you smarten up what I'm saying, and how true is it?
I think that, I think two things. One, there was there's, this polling data comes up like fairly often. At the height of the civil rights movement, there were lots of white Americans who believed that black people were treated equally, right? It's just a total detachment from the reality of that era, right? So that being said, I also think, I don't remember the year that paper that you're talking about came out, but there was a paper, I think it was like 2014 or 2015, that showed that, more white Americans believe they were discriminated against than people of color. So I guess the thing that I would say here is the evidence is overwhelming that is simply not true, right? And so social scientists often do these studies. They're called audit studies, where they send people with equally matched resumes out to apply for jobs. Those studies consistently find that people of color are discriminated against, right? And it's jobs, it's housing, it's getting a car loan, it's voting now, it's rampant, right? And so it's detached from reality. As far as what we do, I think...
I can answer that.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I mean, the question isn't so much for you, it's for white people in general, and how we are carrying ourselves. I mean, the best example to me was after Charlie Kirk died, when in a text message group of 19 of my high school friends were all white men. One of them, who we know is a well-known Trump supporter and Christian nationalist, basically wrote this whole tribute to Charlie Kirk and said, "I'm not going to be silenced anymore." And now these 18 other white guys had to decide that they're going to react to that no matter what they feel. And of course I reacted, and a couple of others did, and said, "Oh, hell no. Oh, hell no, man. Not here. Not ever. You're wrong." And so my larger point is, white folks have to tell other white folks the score. I mean, I just thought it was the case because I had eyes and ears. But until I really started having more thoughtful, more intimate conversations with people of color as I got older and watching documentaries, did I know the extent of it, some of which you just covered, much of which you just never think about, you never know about, including the statistic around, job applications and name sounding and all of this stuff, and college acceptance and all of it.
Right.
And so I think my answer is, and that's why I cut you off, because as a white, as a bien blanco, it's us. We have to do stuff. We have to say stuff. We have to be at the forefront and trying to create this change, because it's not going to be people of color, not their job, A, and it's not convincing when they tell white folks things, apparently. It was to me, but
right. So it's not, I think it's not always convincing. I mean, I would also say when people ask me, I get this question a lot, and I'm like, we don't know what will work, so pick a lane and do something.
yeah, okay.
Right. So I'm like, I teach, I write publicly, sometimes I organize, but you pick a lane and do something. And if you read the history of the civil rights movement, yes, it took people marching in the streets, but it also took a lot of people making sandwiches, right? It took a lot of people
and delivering those sandwiches, and doing childcare, and
right.
like seeing this, you can speak to it in terms of what's going on with the immigrant community, because that's what we're really looking out for them. I mean, their families are being, their parents are being deported, their families being separated. They don't want to go to work. And so a lot of that work is being done in cities across the country. A lot of good people getting into good trouble trying to take care of those families. Sorry to interrupt you, but I just like you could speak to the specifics of that issue with these quote undocumented folks.
The specifics of,
I mean, just the fact that people are looking out for them, and I hear a lot about it in Southern California, especially.
So I think, there's a lot of mutual aid and organizing happening around protecting those folks. I think, there's also sort of like a lot of fear. And one thing that's different and sort of like not in the civil rights narrative of that, I write about and Nicole Hannah-Jones is writing about. One thing that's really different now is the attack on immigrants. And I think, the expanded ICE raids and the sort of shutdown of the border create a context that's very different than the civil rights movement, and is gonna require new strategies and new coalitions to push back.
Yeah, I guess I haven't really thought that much about it. I didn't. Immigration was not the issue then that it is now for any number of reasons.
Right.
The economy wasn't.
Well, also because the laws changed following the civil rights movement, right? So we changed our civil rights laws in 1960, not our civil rights, immigration laws
in
in 1965 because of the sort of racial quotas, and that change has created sort of a new set of issues around immigration.
I think
that the right is reacting to.
You talk and teach about immigration, and just quickly, I feel like when we see the important, the tragic work that they're doing to deport brown folks, especially, and also not let new brown folks into the country, whether it be the southern border or Muslim and Arabs or others, and import more white people. Apparently, I mean, it's kind of hard. We see all this, and most notably, we see ICE on the street and beating the hell out of people that are just doing their jobs. All of that is where we get the reaction from. But the solution, to me, part of the solution has always been to pass comprehensive immigration reform. And people don't think about this, and they don't realize it. And when they say, they try to both sides it. What pisses me off so much is that Democrats with a bunch of Republicans in 2013 almost passed it, if not for John Boehner wouldn't take a vote because it was going to pass the House. It was good. It passed the Senate. He would not take the immigration reform law. He would not put it on the floor. I think that's one of the most important moments. And what we're seeing on the streets right now, not only that, but at the end of the Biden administration, they were again going to pass immigration reform that would have been even bigger and spend even more money on security, by the way, than they did in 2013. But Trump scuttled it when he was running for office and said, don't you dare pass that. I need that as an issue. And if anybody's going to pass it, I'm going to get credit for it. How much of the issue that we're seeing right now would be solved or on a way to be, making things better if you created all the reforms, including all their security measures that they want, but pathways to citizenship, DACA, education, you can buy into health insurance. You want to pay for it. It's ridiculous that they're not allowed to buy it. And finally, obviously, work permits.
So I think it's hard to tell. I think a lot of the issue around immigration isn't actually based on immigration policy. I think it's based on demagoguery, right? And so
definitely,
so I think both of those examples that you've just passed have shown an unwillingness and an unseriousness about solving the problem because, and look, I think both of those bills had still massive problems, right? They weren't free of sort of the demonization of immigrants and targeting, but there is an unwillingness because, you know, Trump sees immigration as his always winning demagogue position, and he's not willing to give that up, right? I also think, you know, the party has moved, and in some ways the country, but definitely the party has moved to the right so far on immigration that they're quite like DHS is quite literally posting neo-Nazi memes on their Twitter profile, right?
That's right.
And so I think some of this is not about, it's not about serious policy, except policies to harm. It's about demagoguing and using immigration to get political power.
You're
right?
absolutely right. And the other point I try to make when talking about immigration is that it's the one controversial issue in America, unlike climate or fossil fuels, unlike guns, unlike healthcare, that doesn't really have a special interest lobbying against it. Because in fact, all capitalists love immigrant labor, and most religious institutions were leading on things like refugee resettlement. So there isn't a special interest lobbying against immigration. It's more likely that they're lobbying for immigration so they can get folks to come here and work and so on and make money off of them. But you said Trump and other right-wingers demagoguing it. You know, I would just add, and obviously you meant this and know it too, it's the right-wing media which makes a tremendous amount of money demonizing and demagoguing immigrants as well. And I would argue that they wag the tail of elected Republicans in this country far more than on the left. But
right, that was one of you know you're talking. We're doing ancient history now, but for Boehner, part of the reason he wouldn't bring it was right-wing media, right? Part of the reason he didn't want to get a vote was right-wing media was so opposed.
Oh, no doubt. That's true of guns as well. It's not even the gun lobbies and how much money they spend as much, because campaign finance, ironically, I think matters a little less. It's the actual right wingers going, don't you dare put a law against silencers. Like, okay, sorry.
Right. No
I could keep you here all day and talk about this issue, but let's do it again real soon. Any final thoughts? I didn't really even get as much to your piece about DEI. It's a provocative piece, but I think it's true. Eliminating DEI isn't just race, it's segregationist. Can you just say a bit about that before I let you go?
Right. So, you know, the argument of that piece is very similar to the one that Nicole Hannah-Jones and others have made. If you get rid of civil rights protections, the country will resegregate. Right. And so it's weird because the Trump administration has not come out and said we are segregationists. But everything that they have done around these issues is in line with the kinds of laws that existed under Jim Crow segregation, right?
How will we resegregate? We're pretty segregated as it is.
So I think, you know, the evidence of 300,000 Black women being pushed out of the workforce is a kind of resegregation. The early evidence of schools letting in fewer Black and Latino students since the Supreme Court overturned affirmative action is a kind of resegregation, right? And then the kinds of, you know, the evidence that there's lots of employment discrimination in the labor market, if folks know that they're likely to be unchecked for doing that, I think that will increase too, right?
Gosh.
But you are right. We are pretty segregated as it is.
We self-segregate in a lot of ways. You know, it's always bothered me personally, because I'm the guy who likes to float on over to the group of Indian folks or Asian folks and always the Black folks, because comedy, humor, really more than anything else. When I learned that in college, I was like, okay, I have a lot more to learn, and still learning, especially from you. Get the book if you haven't already. Thank you so much for joining me.
Right. Thanks for having me.
Professor Victor Ray on critical race theory. We'll talk to you again soon. Thanks for everybody watching live. Can't do this without you. Your excuse, sir. You can punch out if you got to go. I really appreciate you doing this, though.
Yep.
Yeah, that little red thing at the bottom will allow you. And I'll reach out and send you a nice, thoughtful thank you card for joining me. Oh, look, I have a candle. It just came up. It looked like he had to get out of here. So I was like, you better go. That was good. Really good. Really interesting guy. Really important issues. White people, we gotta talk to each other. Gotta get out there, whites. You get in that room with your white friends. If it comes up, you gotta say something. You don't have to blow things up. You can subtly disagree. You don't have to win the point or win the argument. You just let people know that your thought process is different. Your morality is different. And did I say your morality? Yeah. So anyway, I hope that we can all do better, is my point. I wasn't planning on making a closing speech, but I'm still here. I should just mention that I will be back at 3:00. I'll be talking to a really smart woman from another professor, this one from Boston College. Her book is The Second Estate, How the Tax Code Made an American Aristocracy. Ray Madoff is her name. And in her intro, it has her pronouns, but it also says not related. So it says she, her, not related, in case anybody's thinking that she's related to Bernie Madoff. So funny. And sad that she has to do that. But still, she'll be joining me at 3:00. Thanks to everybody who joined me here. Go subscribe at Substack and here on YouTube if you're watching there. And I can't thank you enough. Patreon.com/Pete Dominick. Come join our community. Be a part of it. We have an awesome group of people, many of which are here right now. Hi, Justin. Hi, Kim. And hi, Aaron and Rachel and whoever else stopped by. Great to have you. I'll be back at 3:00. Got to go eat something so I don't faint.